What is going on, guys? Welcome back. Today we are going to be doing two things in this video. Number one, we are going to be cleaning the rest of the parts for the intake manifold and then reassembling that intake manifold. Secondly, we are going to be cleaning the 16G turbo for the Evo 8 back here. So let's get the camera set up over here on the workbench and we'll jump right into it. Okay, so I'll be real with you. I'm not a professional Evo builder, so knowing where all these hoses go back to would be pretty tough for me. So what I did was I went through, put a piece of tape on each hose, labeled them all with a number, and then if you look at my phone over here, I just label all of them on the phone with different numbers to match the numbers in the painting tape. So that way I'll always be able to know what goes back to where. So if you are going to be doing this, I would suggest it. So on that note, I'm going to get jumping on this. I'm going to take all these hoses off. Probably try to clean up some of these clamps with the wire wheel just to get them looking a little bit less rusty. Get all these hoses to the side, start wire wheeling this whole pipe bracket thing. And that's pretty much it for this, and then we'll be able to put the intake manifold back together. So I'll probably throw it on a time lapse, let you guys enjoy that, and I'll see you on the other side of cleaning this. Okay, so that went pretty well. You may have noticed I was using these guys right here. This is the guy I initially start with. It's a smaller 90-degree pick. These are really nice for trying to loosen up hoses, but at the same time, it is pretty sharp, so it could puncture it. So normally what I'll do is I'll try to just go around the edge of the hose, and if it works, fine. If it doesn't, I'll usually find a bigger one that is a little bit less pointy at the end, and kind of go in there and try to get that to break loose the hoses. But with that, I'm leaving me with just this one exposed pipe. So I'm gonna go ahead, start wire wheeling it, and then probably sand it after that and get it all painted.
And as always, when working with rust, safety first.
Hope you all enjoyed that time lapse. If you want to go ahead, we can take a look at some of the progress we've made. So you can see that it hasn't really gotten down to completely bare metal yet. So I think this might be a good time to try out the rust reformer on something like this. There's a lot of little small spaces, so trying to get in there is honestly pretty tough, especially with a wire wheel. I did try to sand everything down a little bit just to make it a little bit more smooth. So I am gonna go ahead, put it on a time lapse. Well, I guess I probably don't even need to do a time lapse. I'm gonna go ahead and use the Rust-Oleum rust reformer on this guy. I'll do a coat on either side, let it dry for a little bit, and then I will come back and hit it with the paint we've been using on all the other pipes. As you can see, I've taped off all the different ports so that no paint gets inside any of the pipes. And I've gone ahead and taped off this sensor that was attached to one of the hoses. Hit it with a wire wheel and then sanded it down with a fine sandpaper just to smooth it out. Go ahead and hit it with the rust reformer. So I've already used this, so it's not going to take a minute of mixing. All right, so it's looking good. I guess the only downside is you have to obviously wait for it to dry. You can't just do it all at once, but everything's looking a lot better. Okay, so got some finished products here. I did go ahead and finish painting these guys. So the process for these, all these pieces was one coat on each side of the rust reformer, then a second coat on each side of that reformer, and then I did one coat of a, this guy right here. It's the Rust-Oleum high heat, it's a grill paint, but it's like a gloss black paint. So far it's been holding up pretty well. There are no clear coats on any of these, so they're kind of sensitive, so I can't really be too rough with them, or you get like a little bit of marking like that and the paint will come off. But honestly, for the quick finish that I put on it, it's really not that bad, and I couldn't really ask for too much more. So I'm going to go ahead now, try and find the bolts for the intake manifold, for the bracket on the back, reassemble all that, and then hopefully get the intake manifold back together. So I do want to point out, I am going to be reinstalling everything on here for like, I guess, demonstrational purposes, and just for me to be able to make sure that I put everything back together and it's easier to finish in the future. But I am going to be taking all of these bolts back out one by one in the future, and I'm going to be doing a hot dipping process. So basically you heat the bolts up until they're super hot, and then you submerge it in motor oil, and when you pull it out, it's like a black coating on it. So obviously zinc plating would be like the coolest and nicest way to be able to do this, but as a guy whose wife's about to kill him for modifying cars, I can't be spending money on a zinc plating setup. So unfortunately, that's what I'm gonna have to do. So you will see when I go to install this EGR valve back on here, just to mock it up, I will not be using a gasket. Same thing with the throttle body. I'm just gonna like loosely bolt it on there so that I know everything is back where it's supposed to be. And for anyone who's watching that needs to know what goes where and what bolts go where, they'll be able to know. But I will go through in a future date, and I will go back and button that all up, torque everything down to the right values, and replace all the gaskets. So with that, let's jump back on putting this thing back together. So I'm gonna go ahead, throw it on a time lapse, and start getting all these hoses back onto that guy. Okay, now they got that all set up, got the tape all removed, got these guys all back to where they all needed to be. We go ahead, start trying to throw it on here. Okay, so I'm kind of thinking if I just go ahead and start installing everything, it'll kind of all just line up into place, right? So we got obviously 2 holes here, 1 there, so that's where this goes. One thing to remember though, if you are gonna be using a media tumbler to try to clean up any rusted bolts, make sure that you do go ahead and either use a wire wheel or a brush and try to clean out the threads. The last thing you want is to clean that out, have all that media like dust in the threads, and then mess up the threads that you're threading into. So I'm gonna go ahead and just throw these guys in, and then move on to the next step. Next up is going to be this guy, the 2 weirdly wrapped hoses. That's going to go just like that. Okay, so next up we are going to be putting in the EGR valve. Just goes like that. There's really only one way, facing towards the back of the manifold. And just remember the bolts for it, they look very similar to the throttle body. The shorter ones are for the EGR valve, and the longer ones are for the throttle body. And again, there will be a gasket that goes here, but I'm not going to put it on right now because I am going to be taking these back out, like I said. So these guys, I do believe, is a 12 millimeter, so I have to grab that. Okay, so we're making good progress. The last thing I think I'm going to put on is probably going to be this guy right here, the throttle body. There's only one way it really goes on, and that would be, try to hold that like that, because you can see the 2 hoses are going to match up right here, and that's obviously where the throttle is. So get that on, and then we should be wrapping this part of the video up soon. And just as a reminder, again, there will be a gasket here. I'm not installing it because I will be redoing these bolts, just in case you're coming in just for this part of the video. And then probably the last thing I'll throw on is this little guy here. It's just a little like crossover vacuum line. So that guy's gonna go right on here. Just like that. Lied, there's one more. Just gonna go right here. It's like pretty easy. So I guess for the one last thing I do want to show is in this whole section here, this guy coming off the T, coming down right here. This is going to go wrap around to the bottom side of the EGR valve, and then this guy right here is going to go to the top part. Okay? Okay, and just like that, it is looking a lot better. It's finally getting back together. There is still this guy I need to bolt down, but honestly I just don't feel like going and digging through trying to find the bolts right now. Next thing I could do is reinstall the fuel rail right here, which would be honestly pretty sick. I'd be pretty happy about that. I'm just happy to see this thing starting to come back together, because I mean, it's starting to actually look pretty good now. Like, I mean, I do have to take care of these bolts here. Like I said, I am going to dip all these bolts so they'll be nice and clean once the final install goes back in. But pretty happy with the way things are going. For anyone that is watching this video as like a how to reinstall all the lines in the intake manifold, I'll just run through the connection points real quick with you. So again, this guy right here is the long one. The T comes off, goes down to the bottom of the EGR valve. The other section comes on the top of the EGR valve. These 2 points, you can obviously see it's pretty self-explanatory. These are pretty self-explanatory. This guy right here just comes to the very front nipple here. This guy clicks in here, and then I forget, to be honest, right now where he plugs into back here, but I will update in a future video. This guy gets plugged in here, gets right into there, and that's pretty much everything you got, and these guys are just coolant lines. So with that, I guess we'll be jumping on to trying to clean the turbo. So I'm going to go ahead and move on, try and start cleaning on the turbo. There is still some things I'm trying to work out with the turbo. I'm trying to figure out exactly what in my head I think is the problem, because honestly I don't really feel like spending the money to rebuild a stock 16G turbo. If I am going to spend money like that, I would rather just put it towards a more comparable turbo to this size, but just have a new one, because it might just help make, you know, rule out one thing that could be wrong with the car in the future. So I mean, I'm going to show you. I don't know if we'll be able to see it, but you can see in here, it's pretty dirty. There's oil residue, and then if you turn it around on the outlet, you can, you can't really see with the camera, but it's black. You can see that. So I've said it before, and I'll say it again in this video, just in case this is anyone's first time seeing my videos. The issue I'm having here is I'm not really sure whether it is a blown turbo seal for the oil seal, which is basically just like a piston ring that sits on the compressor side and on the turbine side of the turbo. The turbine side, the hot side, doesn't seem to have like any oil at all. When you do look in through where the drain tube was, you can see in the middle of the cartridge there is like a decent little coating of oil, but it's not anywhere near as bad as just the cold side of the turbo. So honestly, what I'm thinking is that originally on the car, the intake that was on there, the PCV nipple off the right side of the valve cover was routed right to the intake so that it could go back into the system. What I think is happening is I think there might be too much positive crank pressure. Like, I think if someone in the past had ran a bigger turbo, but actually did use that same intake, that it might have been pushing oil just through the PCV system and then back into the intake and then back into the turbo, which is why it's so dirty. There is some residue in the intake manifold as well, which I'm going to try and take care of. So it's kind of like up in the air. I think what I am going to do is clean this turbo up. I will go ahead reinstall it, because there is zero shaft play on the thing. I didn't hear any weird noises when it used to run. I didn't remember seeing any blue or white smoke. So I don't think it's the turbo. I think it's more the PCV system, which could be even worse, because then it makes me think about the piston rings and whether there's a ton of blow-by going by. So I think ultimately what I'll probably try to do is clean this guy up, get him reinstalled, and then I will eventually have to install a catch can system, because I'm spending a lot of time cleaning the engine bay, and I certainly don't want to just throw like a breather filter on the nipple for the PCV system and just have oil shot all over the engine bay. So I'm gonna go ahead, probably throw it on a time lapse, get to trying to clean this guy up, and then hopefully we can wrap this video up. continued taking the turbo apart, as you saw in the time lapse. I think I ended off in the time lapse where I was taking off either the oil feed or the coolant, I believe, feed for the turbo. Actually, no, it would be the coolant drain. So I got it off, and you know, all the contemplating that I've been doing, I want to show you guys something. Obviously, I was saying I wanted to not rebuild the turbo, but I don't know if we'll be able to see. But I took the coolant line off, and when you look in there, I wish I could get like a good video of it, but it's not looking good. It's really like kind of gross and like snotty looking in there. So I think that, I don't know, somehow oil maybe has been mixing with coolant in the turbo. I'm really hoping it's not a head gasket issue, because honestly, all the rest of the oil in the car has been looking fine. Like there hasn't been any kind of like clear signs of oil mixing with coolant. So I think it's the turbo, but honestly, I really don't want to rebuild a stock turbo, because they're anywhere from like $300 to $500 for a rebuild. And I'd rather just spend that on a new turbo instead of rebuilding a 22-year-old turbo. Obviously, I don't want to go big power on this thing, so it would be something around the same size. But as far as what I'm going to do now, I'm just going to clean it up a little bit more just to clean it up. So after taking the turbo apart and seeing just how dirty it was inside and how much oil and soot was there, it started making me wonder, like, again, I've said this before, is it a piston ring oil seal problem, or is it a PCV system problem? So I think I've said it before, and let me show you. This is the stock intake manifold, or not stock, but what was in it. They do recirculate, so that's the recirculation tube for the blow-off valve, or the bypass valve in this case. And then this right here is actually where the breather hose from the positive crank ventilation system would attach to off the valve cover. And so if you look here, this is where this would come into here, and then this is where it would go onto the turbo. So if you look here, there is like some little bit of soot, but it's really not that bad. Like when I drag my finger through it, my finger doesn't come off dirty. But right here where the PCV system ties in, where positive crank ventilation could be pushing oil and blow-by into the intake system, you go like that, and all of a sudden it's a little dirtier. And then you go down to here where it meets the turbo, and it gets dirtier and dirtier. So it does seem like we actually are dealing with a positive crank ventilation system problem, where the turbo's looking pretty bad, don't get me wrong. I am going to try to continue cleaning it a little bit more, but there is a chance that the turbo could still be good, and it's actually just that, I mean, these Evo engines, they're kind of known to run a little rich and have a lot of crank pressure, but it's not necessarily a blown turbo yet. In which case, we could just install a catch can and then see if we can monitor it and maybe if it fixes the problem or not. But just something I thought I would share with you guys. But I mean, to be honest, I think that's probably going to be it for this video, because I don't see a point in like really going hard on this turbo when I could just be eventually throwing it in the trash or rebuilding it like years down the road when I'm not already spending a bunch of money on a car. And I do have the ETS stock route intercooler piping being delivered today. So I was excited because I thought I was going to be able to go ahead and get all this installed in the car like real soon, but apparently the turbo over here has other plans for me. So again, this is probably all I got for this one. It's not the way I wanted it to end, but I mean, hey, that's working on a car, right? So if you guys do like the content, please go ahead and like, comment, subscribe, share, tell all your friends. And I guess until the next time, peace out and keep wrenching. Later.